Thank you, everybody, and welcome. Let's give the concert band another round of applause. They did a great job. Our next selection for you, God of Our Fathers, was written for the 1980 inauguration of Ronald Reagan, and it's based on the hymn song, God of Our Fathers, and it's stated three different ways in here. First in the woodwinds, then in the brass as a slightly faster chorale, and then in the end as a march. It's a wonderful arrangement by Thomas Knox. This is God of Our Fathers. The last 2 years, we've been really fortunate in the band department to have a graduate assistant that was the assistant pep band conductor, the assistant marching band conductor, did a lot of work for me last semester when I was out for a little while. and has just done an outstanding job. Was able to travel with the pep band and did a great job all over the nation with that group. We're going to miss her when she graduates with a master's degree. It is my pleasure to welcome to the podium from Norwalk, Maine, Miss Sarah Quayle. Each year, the Symphonic Band has a contest within the group to see who will be the featured soloist on our spring tour and on our spring concert. This year's piece is entitled Log Cabin Blues. It's a xylophone solo, and it was made popular during the days when the recording technology was a little bit different than what we had today. We had a wax cylinder, and the xylophone recorded really well on the wax cylinder. So during those days, the xylophone became a very popular instrument because it was one of the few that recorded really well and could be heard by many people. And so xylophone ragtime became a popular form during the 1920s and the early 1900s. And so moving forward to today, the xylophone ragtime still lives on in the percussion world, and it's a great feature for the group to play. It's a fun little piece. And this year's winner comes to us from Waldo, Maine. You heard him earlier with the concert band playing drum set, a phenomenal percussionist, music performance major, and we'd like to feature Kyle again on Log Cabin Blues. It's such a treat to work with such talented students out here. Graduate assistants and performance alike. It's so much fun to make music with them. We had a great tour this year. We went to 9 different schools in 3 days and had a wonderful time, and the group just grew and grew all semester long. We're going to play a piece now entitled Adagio. It's written by David Holsinger, and it's one of 3 pieces he wrote in this style. He wrote on a hymn song of Lowell Mason, on a hymn song of Philip Bliss, and Adagio is kind of a trio of slow sound pieces. And this is a wonderful piece. It just takes its time to develop and works through some different colors of the ensemble and shows off what they can do musically. This is Adagio. And now for something completely different. The next piece we're going to play is the first movement from the symphony called The Blue Marble. It's a new multimedia piece written by Julie Giroux. And the first movement that we're going to play for you is supposed to represent life on Earth and its various forms and the joy of the different aspects of life on Earth. So you're going to see and hear all sorts of different colors and sounds. And in the ensemble you're going to hear piano. We have Dr. Artisani joining us on piano. We have Dr. Edelman joining us on harp. We have Dr. Barrett back there filling in on playing some trombone parts. And also we have the sound and video control back in the booth by Jameson. Everyone wave Jameson. How are we doing back there? Yes. You all follow instructions so well. So, we had a chance to rehearse this over the semester. We played it on tour without the multimedia, and the piece stands on its own without that. And we had one rehearsal here on Wednesday to put it all together. I really think you'll enjoy the first movement of the Blue Marble Symphony. Next selection we're going to play for you is a European march, entitled Entry March of the Boyars. The Boyars are an aristocratic class from Russia and Romania, and it comes from a larger piece of music written originally for orchestra and transcribed for band. It's a wonderful piece. It features our woodwinds prominently, and also it's a different use of percussion for a march. It uses kind of the Janissary sounds, the sounds of the Middle Eastern, so you're going to hear metallic sounds, tambourines, cymbals, and triangles in this. So this is Entry March of the Boyars. Before we play our last couple selections, I'd like to take a moment and thank the CCA crew for all the wonderful work they did in preparing this piece here. It took us 3 hours to set up the rehearsal for that 6 minutes of music, and a lot of people, a lot of things happening on the stage to make that happen. So I want to thank the CCA crew for all the stuff that they've done for us. Let's give them a big round. I'd like to thank the faculty of the School of Performing Arts. You saw them out on the stage helping us, and it's so wonderful to have colleagues who will step in and perform with the students and help the performances be even more successful than they are. So let's give the faculty a big round of applause. And at this time, I'd like to have all the seniors in this group please stand and be recognized for their 4 years of hard work and dedication. Seniors, please rise. Graduate student, Senator Higgins graduating. Kyle back there. Kyle, raising his hands, there we go. It's been a treat to work with you all. I wish you the best as you go on, and don't stop playing. Don't stop playing. This is a wonderful, wonderful lifetime thing that we can do. The next piece we're going to do is entitled Incantation and Dance. It was written in the 1960s, and it's one of the very first pieces that used percussion in a different way. You've heard in the march, timekeeping and simple things like that. Well, John Barnes Chant took the percussion section and treated them as a third choir in the organization, and used percussion not only as timekeepers, but as the folks who actually introduced rhythmic motives that the entire piece is built on. So it starts out with a very slow, quiet, spooky incantation, and turns very quickly into a very violent dance, with all the rhythmic themes that you're going to hear for the rest of the piece introduced one by one in the percussion section. So this is Incantation and Dance. I wish to thank you for all being here this evening. It's been a wonderful year with these folks, and I'm going to be sad to see them all go. We're playing well, and I wish we could just keep going on, and every year it's the same thing. I go through withdrawals, not having a band, and then we get a new band in the fall, and we work to this point, and it's just so wonderful to have these students to work with, and I always want to give them my deepest thanks for all that they've done. Thank you, folks. I'm sure you know this next piece, it needs no introduction.
Woo!